The building sat far from any highway, tucked behind tall fences and quiet fields, as if even the world itself had agreed not to disturb what lived inside. It was a retired military K-9 facility, a place most people never visited and few even knew existed. The dogs housed there had once been essential, irreplaceable. Now, they were invisible. Inside the kennels, silence ruled. These dogs had learned long ago that silence meant survival. Barking could give away a position. Whining could cost lives. Even now, long after their final missions, the habit remained. They lay still behind steel gates, bodies, eyes sharp but tired. Their muzzles were gray, their movements slow, yet every muscle still carried memory. A handler walked the corridor, clipboard in hand, stopping occasionally to check water bowls or glance at notes taped beside each kennel. Words like reactive, high anxiety, not suitable for families appeared again and again. These dogs were not abandoned, but they were unwanted, too complicated, too damaged, too risky. The door at the far end opened. The man who entered did not wear a uniform. No medals, no insignia, just jeans, boots, and a plain jacket. But the way he moved gave him away instantly. Straight posture, controlled steps, eyes that scanned without appearing to. This was someone trained to notice everything. A Navy SEAL retired. The staff greeted him politely, expecting the usual questions. Most visitors came to look at one dog, maybe two, sometimes none. Many left after 10 minutes, overwhelmed by the warnings. This one doesn't like sudden movement. That one can't be around children. This one hasn't slept through a night in years. The man listened, nodding, saying little. He walked slowly down the corridor, stopping in front of each kennel. He didn't reach toward the dogs. He didn't try to make friendly noises. He simply stood there and observed. One dog growled softly, pressing its body against the back wall. Another barked once, sharp and defensive. One paced endlessly, nails clicking against concrete. The man never flinched. Then he reached the last kennel. Inside sat a large German shepherd, posture upright, ears alert. The dog didn't bark, didn't move. Its eyes locked onto the man with unsettling intensity, not anger, not fear, recognition. The man stopped walking. For a long moment, the two stared at each other. The handler cleared his throat nervously. "That one," he said carefully, "is not recommended." The man didn't look away. "Why?" he asked. "Multiple deployments, blast exposure, handler killed in action. He still thinks he's guarding someone." The man nodded once. His jaw tightened slightly. He knew that feeling. He stepped back, turned, and looked down the corridor at all the kennels. The anxious ones, the aggressive ones, the broken ones. "I'll take all of them," he said. The words didn't register at first. "I'm sorry," the handler asked. "All of them," the man repeated, calm and steady. "Every dog here." The corridor went completely silent. The handler laughed once, awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. When the man didn't smile, the laughter died. "You mean you want to sponsor care?" someone asked. "No," the man said. "I want to take them home." Faces stiffened, papers rustled. One of the staff members shook her head. "That's not possible," she said. "These dogs are unstable, some are aggressive, some have medical needs that cost thousands a year. You can't." "I can," the man interrupted, not raising his voice, "and I will." They tried to reason with him. They told him about lawsuits, about liability, about neighbors complaining, about the risk of injury, about dogs that had bitten before, about dogs that destroyed rooms, about dogs that never stopped packing. He listened to all of it. Then he said quietly, "They did everything they were asked to do. Now it's my turn." There was something final in his tone. Paperwork took hours. Waivers stacked up. Phone calls were made to supervisors who couldn't believe what they were hearing. More than once, someone asked if he wanted to reconsider, maybe start with one dog, see how it went. Each time his answer stayed the same. All of them. When the transport day came, the calm shattered. Dogs reacted instantly to movement, leashes, unfamiliar handlers. One lunged, one froze, one tried to bolt. The air filled with barking, snapping, panic. Staff members struggled to maintain control. The man stepped forward. He didn't shout commands, didn't grab collars aggressively. He moved slowly, deliberately, placing himself between the dogs and the chaos. "It's okay," he said quietly, not to calm them but to ground himself. One by one, the dogs were loaded. By the time the last kennel was empty, the building felt wrong, too quiet, too hollow. As the truck doors closed, a handler wiped her eyes. "He's going to regret this," someone whispered. The man climbed into the driver's seat. As he pulled away, he glanced in the mirror. The German Shepherd sat upright, watching the road ahead as if already on mission. The man exhaled slowly. He had no idea how hard this would be. But for the first time since leaving the teams, his chest felt steady. Behind him in the truck were dogs no one wanted. Warriors the world had finished with. And none of them would ever be left behind again. The drive away from the facility was tense, heavy with noise and emotion. Inside the transport truck, the dogs shifted constantly. Nails scraped against metal flooring. Deep, warning growls rolled through the air like distant thunder. One dog barked sharply, another whined without stopping. Fear had a sound, and the truck was filled with it. The man kept both hands steady on the wheel. He had driven through worse, dark roads in foreign lands, moments where one wrong move meant death. Still, this felt different. There were no enemies here, no mission brief, no exit strategy, just him and a truck full of retired K9s whose world had just been turned upside down. At a red light, the barking intensified. The German Shepherd, the one who had stared him down at the facility, rose to his feet, placing his body between the other dogs and the front of the truck. He didn't bark. He simply stood, muscles tight, eyes locked forward. Guarding. The man noticed it in the mirror and felt a strange tightness in his chest. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said softly, knowing the dog probably didn't understand the words, but maybe understood the tone. The light turned green. When they arrived at the property, the sun was already dropping low, painting the land in gold and shadow. The place wasn't fancy, just open ground, fencing, a modest house, and a wide stretch of quiet that most people would find unsettling. The dogs reacted immediately. New smells, new space, no walls. Panic surged. One dog lunged toward the fence, teeth bared. Another dropped flat to the ground, trembling violently. Two spun in tight circles, barking at nothing. One refused to move at all, eyes wild, breathing fast. The man didn't rush them. He opened the truck slowly, one door at a time, letting each dog decide when to step out. Some had to be coaxed. Others pulled hard, desperate to establish control over the unfamiliar territory. As each dog touched the ground, the weight of their individual histories became visible. There was Rex, the Belgian with a scar that ran across his shoulder, the result of shrapnel. He moved with sharp precision, constantly scanning, never relaxing. There was Duke, older, heavier, joints stiff with age. He had once detected explosives with perfect accuracy. Now he limped slightly, pride forcing him to hide the pain. There was Shadow, the quiet German Shepherd who rarely made a sound. He stayed close, watching everything, never blinking for long. These were not pets. These were veterans. The first mistake came quickly. As the man guided one of the dogs toward the fenced area, another lunged without warning. Teeth snapped inches from his arm. The sound was explosive, violent. Everyone froze. The man didn't strike back, didn't shout, didn't retreat. He stood perfectly still. Slowly he lowered his hand and turned his body slightly sideways, non-threatening, controlled. His heart hammered, but his face remained calm. The dog backed off confused. The man exhaled. "Easy," he murmured. "I get it." That night tested him. The dogs refused to settle. Barking echoed across the land. One slammed repeatedly against the fence. Another paced until his paws bled. Duke refused food entirely. Shadow sat upright, guarding the house, eyes fixed on the darkness. The neighbors didn't take long to notice. Lights flicked on. A distant voice shouted. A phone rang inside the house. The man ignored it. Instead, he grabbed a blanket and sat outside. Right there. With them. The cold crept in. The ground was hard, the barking continued. Hours passed. Then something small changed. Rex stopped packing. Duke approached the food bowl cautiously and sniffed it. Shadow shifted his position, placing himself between the man and the fence. Protection, not fear. The man leaned back against a post, exhaustion finally catching up to him. His eyes burned. His hands shook slightly. He hadn't realized how tired he was, not just physically, but emotionally. "You did your job," he whispered into the night. "All of you did." No one had ever told the dogs that before. Over the next few days, the challenges. One dog refused to enter the house, growling at doorways as if expecting an ambush. Another destroyed a water bowl in seconds. A third reacted violently to the sound of a helicopter passing overhead, slamming into the fence until blood stained the wire. Each incident drew warnings from friends. "This is dangerous. You can't fix combat trauma. You're going to get hurt." The man listened, then ignored them. Instead of force, he used familiarity. He introduced routines, simple, predictable ones. Morning walks at the same time, food placed in the same spots, no sudden movements, no yelling, no pressure. At night, he slept on the floor again. Not because he had to, because he chose to. The dogs noticed. They always noticed. By the end of the week, Rex no longer lunged at shadows. Duke ate regularly, tail wagging faintly as if embarrassed by it. Shadow began sleeping, not deeply, but enough to rest. Still, the danger remained. One evening, a loud crash from the nearby road sent 3 dogs into full panic. Chaos erupted. Leashes tangled. Barking filled the air. In the middle of it, the man was knocked to the ground. For a split second, fear surged. Then something extraordinary happened. Shadow moved. The German shepherd placed himself over the man's body, teeth bared, not at him but at the others. A warning, a command. "Stand down." The dogs froze. Silence fell. The man lay there, stunned, staring up at the darkening sky. He felt Shadow's weight, solid and steady, protecting him without being told. When the dog finally stepped back, the man slowly sat up. His hands were shaking. Not from fear. From understanding. These dogs weren't broken. They were still soldiers. They just needed someone who wouldn't abandon them when the war followed them home. As night settled in, the barking didn't return. For the first time, the property was quiet. Not empty. Peaceful. The man looked around at the dogs, sleeping, watching, resting in their own ways. Part 1 had been about a decision. Part 2 revealed the truth. This wasn't rescue. This was a reunion between warriors who finally understood each other. And the hardest part was still coming. The days that followed were a careful dance between chaos and calm. The dogs had begun to accept the land as their own, but old habits die slowly. Each sound, each shadow, each sudden movement tested the limits of their trust. The Navy SEAL had long since stopped counting his own exhaustion. He barely noticed the bruises forming on his arms from restraining the strongest ones during bursts of panic. He had endured worse in combat, yet this challenge was different. Here he fought to earn trust, not obey orders. Early morning fog wrapped the property in a soft gray, muting sounds and sharpening senses. Rex, the Belgian, rose from his corner with tense muscles, ears forward, eyes scanning the perimeter. The seal moved slowly toward him, crouching low to the ground. "Easy, Rex, I've got you," he murmured. The dog flinched at first but did not retreat, merely shifting his weight slightly, acknowledging the voice. Duke, older and slower, stood beside the fence, tail stiff, muscles quivering. Each step he took was careful, measured. A memory of a distant explosion flickered in his eyes, unseen but felt. He had dragged a wounded soldier to safety, earned medals, and endured pain most humans couldn't imagine. Now, decades later, he was labeled unfit for adoption. But the seal saw something different. "You're still a soldier, old friend," he whispered. "And soldiers deserve purpose, not exile." Shadow, the quiet German shepherd who had claimed the seal's side during the first night, remained vigilant. Every movement, every breath of wind, every shift in the shadows held meaning. The dog's entire posture radiated attention and discipline. The seal felt it in his bones. He had known this presence before, in the hushed moments before an operation, in the calm before an enemy strike, in the stillness of a team waiting for orders. Shadow was more than a dog. He was a partner, a reflection, a reminder of the bond forged in danger. The seal's mornings began before sunrise. He moved among the dogs, letting them see him, smell him, understand that he wasn't just another human passing through. Breakfast came in careful portions, served in the same bowls at the same time in the same quiet order. Mistakes were tolerated. Panic wasn't punished. Fear was met with patience. The routine was simple, but the consistency slowly stitched threads of trust. By the end of the first week, cracks began to show in the walls each dog had built around themselves. Rex allowed the seal to touch his shoulder briefly before stepping away. Duke took food from his hand without growling. Shadow, ever vigilant, allowed the seal to sit beside him while keeping watch. Small victories, almost imperceptible, yet monumental. But peace was fragile. One evening, the distant hum of a helicopter ignited instinctual terror. 3 dogs erupted simultaneously. Teeth snapped, barking thundered, paws scraped the ground. Duke stumbled, nearly falling. Rex lunged, growling violently at the unseen threat. Shadow barked once, a sharp, commanding sound meant to contain chaos, but chaos had already taken hold. The seal moved fast. He stepped into the fray, arms wide, voice calm, commanding yet gentle. "Rex, Duke, easy, Shadow, easy." His words cut through the panic not by volume but by certainty. For a moment he feared the worst. One misstep and someone could be hurt, him, the dogs, anyone nearby. Then Shadow acted. The dog leapt between Rex and Duke, forming a barrier, eyes blazing with authority. Chaos slowed. The others paused, acknowledging the command. Within seconds, the group settled enough to allow the seal to corral them one by one, patience and calm guiding every movement. Afterward, as the adrenaline faded, the seal knelt beside Shadow, placing a hand on his head. "Good job," he whispered. "You saved them. You saved me." Shadow leaned into the touch, but the vigilance never left his eyes. The moment marked something profound. This wasn't just training, it was understanding. The dogs had not forgotten their mission. They had simply been waiting for someone who understood the war that never left, the way pain and loyalty lingered long after the battle was over. Night fell, thick and heavy, and the man sat outside again, the dogs around him, alert but calmer. The world seemed distant. No neighbors shouting, no phone calls, just him and the pack of veterans who had once carried entire teams through danger zones. The seal's mind wandered to the soldiers he had lost, the ones he hadn't been able to save, the ones whose deaths haunted his dreams. Each dog reminded him of them. Each scar, each limping step, each flinch was a memory of service, a proof of loyalty. He could not save the humans left behind, but maybe he could save these warriors who had no voice but a bark, no hands but a paw, no choice but to trust someone again. He began noticing small details. The way Duke tilted his head when he spoke, Rex's subtle tail wag when he passed the food bowl, Shadow's constant, unblinking observation, scanning, calculating every threat. It was exhausting, physically and mentally, but the seal thrived in the tension. He felt alive in a way he hadn't since active duty. Visitors came slowly, mostly veterans curious about the story. They watched the dogs cautiously, fearing aggression. But the seal had trained them differently, not commands but patience, not fear but presence. Veterans saw a reflection of themselves in the dogs, worn, wary, but still capable of loyalty, still capable of trust. One man, a former infantry soldier, knelt by Rex and whispered, "You saved my life once. Maybe now I can save yours." The dogs responded intuitively, leaning, nudging, allowing touch, offering warmth. The seal realized the truth. This wasn't adoption. It wasn't charity. It was therapy, mutual rescue. He had rescued them from neglect and a quiet, meaningless retirement, but they were also rescuing him from his own demons, from the shadows of war that never left, from the nights when memories of lost teammates kept him awake. Still, the challenges were unending. One night, an unknown intruder, a stray dog wandering onto the property, provoked Rex. The older dog snapped, growled, and bared teeth. Duke barked in fear. Shadow stood ready. For the first time, the seal was truly tested. He moved calmly, confidently, guiding each dog with body language more than voice. It took hours to calm them, but it worked. By dawn, the intruder had retreated and the pack lay around him, exhausted but intact. The seal didn't sleep that night. He thought about trust, loyalty, trauma, and resilience, about soldiers, both two-legged and four-legged, who had given everything. This was war of a different kind. No bullets, no medals, no headlines. Just patience, understanding, and a refusal to leave anyone behind. By the end of the week, small transformations were undeniable. Rex followed the seal on walks without tension. Duke rested in the house rather than packing. Shadow allowed the seal to sleep in the room, lying at the foot of the bed instead of standing guard. Each step forward was hard-won, every success earned. The seal finally allowed himself a small smile. He had faced worse. He had survived combat zones, ambushes, and deadly missions. But nothing had tested him like this, earning the trust of a pack of dogs no one else wanted, dogs society had written off. Yet every moment, every small victory reinforced a truth he already knew deep down. They were soldiers. They were survivors. They were not broken. And they would follow him anywhere. The first night that tested everything arrived without warning. A storm rolled in from the west, black clouds blotting out the moon, wind whipping through the trees and rattling the old fence. The dogs reacted immediately. What was merely a distant rumble to humans became an apocalypse in their world. Flashing lights of lightning, booming sounds of thunder, and the smell of rain carrying unseen threats. Instinct surged through them like electricity. Rex's paws struck the ground with alarming speed. Every muscle in his body tensed as he circled the yard repeatedly, teeth bared at shadows. Duke's old joints protested with every step, yet he moved with an unnatural speed, flinching at every crack of thunder. Shadow, vigilant as always, leapt from his resting spot, barking sharply, moving between the others to assert order. But even Shadow's command could not stop the panic. The Navy SEAL watched from the doorway of the house, heart pounding. He had faced firefights, ambushes, and explosions that would have destroyed ordinary men or dogs, but this chaos was different. There were no orders to follow, no clear enemy. Only instincts, fear, and the raw reactions of creatures who had spent their lives surviving impossible dangers. He stepped out into the rain, boots sinking slightly into the wet soil. "It's okay, I'm right here, you're safe," he called softly, his voice steady but commanding. Rex barked violently, circling toward him, then skidded to a stop, unsure. Duke froze mid-step, eyes wide, trembling violently. Shadow barked a single sharp warning, making all others pause for the briefest of moments. The seal knew there was no rushing them. Any sudden movement could trigger a stampede. He sank slowly to the ground, extending his hand. "Easy, easy, I've got you," he said, repeating the words like a mantra, letting his calmness contrast the storm around them. Minutes passed, nothing changed. Then a loud crash, part of the old fence collapsing under the weight of the wind, sent the pack into a frenzy. Rex lunged toward the sound, teeth snapping inches from the seal's arm. Duke bolted in the opposite direction, paws slipping in mud. Shadow barked again, running toward Rex, creating a protective barrier, but the chaos was too much. The seal acted instinctively. Years of training, both in combat and in working with K9s, guided him. He moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding direct confrontation. "Rex, Duke, easy," he called, positioning himself between the dogs. His hands were shaking, but his voice was unwavering. Slowly, methodically, he each dog, guiding them with gentle pressure on their shoulders and clear, consistent commands. Hours passed. By the time the storm began to subside, the pack had settled enough to allow the seal to coax them into the house. Waterlogged, exhausted, and trembling, they stood quietly as he set up blankets on the floor. Each dog found a spot near him, forming a tight circle of weary warriors. He sat among them, leaning against the wall, shivering from the cold and wet, feeling the raw weight of responsibility on his shoulders. The storm had been a test, a challenge that none of them had anticipated, but he had survived it. And the dogs, though shaken, had survived it too. The night did not end there. Sleep was a fragile state. Every rumble, every distant crack of thunder, every creak of the old house drew reactions. Duke whimpered softly, moving closer to the seal. Rex's ears twitched constantly, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Shadow, ever vigilant, did not sleep at all, standing guard near the doorway. The seal could feel his own muscles trembling with tension. He had not realized the physical toll of moving, restraining, and comforting the pack through hours of storm-induced panic. Yet he did not leave them. He could not. At one point, a bolt of lightning struck near the property, shaking the ground. Duke barked hysterically, attempting to bolt. Rex reacted instantly, teeth bared at the older dog. Shadow lunged to assert control. Chaos threatened to erupt again, but the seal's presence calmed them, his touch grounding them just enough to prevent disaster. Hours stretched like days. The storm raged, and the seal remained vigilant, breathing with the dogs, staying present, absorbing their fear as if it were his own. This was no ordinary night. This was a battle of endurance, patience, and trust, and he could not afford to fail. Slowly, over hours, small signs of recovery emerged. Rex's posture softened. Duke ceased trembling completely, curling up beside the seal. Shadow finally lay down, still alert but allowing his body to relax. The storm had tested them, pushed them to the brink, but the bond had held. By dawn, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted just enough to reveal pale sunlight filtering through wet trees. The ground was a mess of mud and flattened grass. The dogs moved slowly, heads lowered, muscles tense but less so than before. The seal rose to his feet, arms sore, body exhausted. He surveyed the pack, proud despite the fatigue. "You did it," he said quietly, voice hoarse. "We all did." At breakfast, the dogs ate without fear or hesitation for the first time in days. Duke wagged his tail slightly. Rex sat still but alert, watching the seal as if waiting for orders. Shadow finally relaxed fully, lying beside him, head on his boots. The storm had left its mark, scratches, mud-stained coats, nervous glances. But it had also changed something fundamental. The pack had survived together. They had trusted him enough to accept his leadership, not as a replacement for their military training, but as a continuation of it in a world that had forgotten them. The seal knew the storm was a lesson. He realized that trust was not earned in calm, easy moments. It was forged in chaos. And every dog in his care, no matter how broken, had proven they were still warriors. Later, as he cleaned the kennels and bandaged minor scratches, the seal reflected on what the night had revealed. These dogs had faced unimaginable dangers in the field. They had saved lives, endured explosions, and carried the weight of human fear and responsibility. Yet now, in the quiet of a storm, they had confronted vulnerability of a different kind. The fear of the unknown, the fear of safety that did not come from a handler in full gear. And they had survived. He looked at the group assembled in the living room, bodies pressed close, eyes bright despite exhaustion. Each dog had a story written in scars, limps, and gray muzzles. But tonight, they had added a new story, a story of survival, trust, and loyalty renewed. The seal smiled faintly, knowing the next challenge would be even harder. The storm had been the first true test. The dogs had passed. But the real battle was only beginning. Outside, the sun rose, glinting on wet fur and mud-streaked windows. Inside, a Navy SEAL and a pack of retired K-9s sat together, exhausted but unbroken. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, everything felt possible. They were no longer simply retired. They were a family. And from that night onward, nothing, not fear, not chaos, not even the world itself, would be able to break them apart. The morning after the storm, the property was transformed. Mud was everywhere, grass flattened, and water pooled in hollows of the yard. But for the first time in weeks, the dogs moved with something closer to calm than panic. Even Rex, still alert and tense, had stopped circling the perimeter incessantly. Shadow, vigilant as ever, allowed himself a few moments of rest, eyes softening at the edges. Duke, older and slower, sat beside the seal, tail tapping lightly against the wet ground. The Navy SEAL rose before sunrise, boots sinking into the wet earth. The air was crisp, sharp with the smell of rain-soaked soil and pine. He could hear the dogs stirring, the soft rustle of fur and paws as they explored the yard. No growls, no panic, just cautious curiosity. He smiled faintly. It was a small victory, but after nights like the last, even small victories felt monumental. He began introducing routines, simple, predictable, deliberate. Morning walks at the same time, along the same paths. Breakfast served in identical bowls placed in the same locations. Water refreshed regularly. No sudden movements. No loud commands. No expectation of obedience, only consistency. The SEAL had learned in combat that consistency could calm even the most hyper-alert soldiers. Here, the principle applied equally. Rex approached him first, head lowered but tail moving subtly. The SEAL crouched and extended a hand. "Easy, easy, I've got you," he whispered. The dog sniffed, stepped closer, and allowed a gentle touch to his shoulder. Then, without warning, Rex leaned slightly into the hand. It was tentative, almost imperceptible, but it was trust. Duke followed, slower, more cautious. His joints protested, but he didn't flinch from the SEAL's presence. Shadow, true to form, remained near the doorway, eyes alert, ears pricked. Yet even Shadow moved closer than usual, allowing the SEAL to stand near him without tension. These small victories were revolutionary. The storm had tested their instincts, and they had survived it. Now, in the calm, they began to heal, not as obedient pets, but as beings learning that safety existed outside the battlefield. Afternoons became training of a different kind. Not commands, but trust-building exercises. The SEAL would walk among them slowly, letting them choose proximity, pace, and direction. If a dog hesitated, he would wait. If a dog approached him, he would remain still. He understood that real healing required patience, not coercion. One day, while walking along the fence line, Rex froze at a bird rustling in the brush. Normally, his instinct would have been to lunge, snap, or bark endlessly. But this time, the SEAL knelt nearby, hand extended, voice calm. "Easy, it's okay. No one's hurting you." The dog's muscles slowly released tension. He stepped forward, sniffed the SEAL's hand, and then walked on. The victory was silent, unnoticed by anyone outside, but monumental inside. Duke surprised him next. The older dog, who had refused food for days after arrival, finally accepted it from the SEAL's hand. Tail wagging faintly, eyes softening, he ate without fear. It was a simple act, but in that moment, the SEAL realized how much courage it took for a warrior to trust again after trauma. Shadow, ever observant, took longer. The German Shepherd's trust was cautious, deliberate, but undeniable. During one walk, a sudden noise, a car door slamming miles away, sent him into alert. Yet instead of panic, Shadow froze, turned toward the seal, and awaited his signal. The seal raised a hand, spoke softly, and Shadow relaxed, allowing the tension in his body to fade. The property, once a storm-ravaged chaos, became a place of healing. The dogs explored, sniffed, rested, and sometimes even played, a rare sight for retired military canines. Their bodies, and worn, reflected the hardships of their past, but their spirits began to regain something they had lost, a sense of purpose beyond missions and orders. It was during these quiet afternoons that the bond between the seal and the dogs deepened. He noticed how each one had its own personality, quirks, and fears. Rex was vigilant, protective, yet capable of tenderness. Duke was cautious, stubborn, but deeply loyal. Shadow was disciplined, intelligent, and perceptive, the pack's natural leader, yet capable of gentleness once trust was earned. The seal also noticed how the dogs reacted to him emotionally. They mirrored his moods, sensed his tension, and responded to his calm. He had faced life-and-death situations with human soldiers, but these dogs were different. They didn't question orders. They felt his presence, his intent, his patience. Evenings brought another layer of connection. The seal would sit on the floor, blanket wrapped around him, and the dogs would gather near, some close, some cautious. Rex leaned into his side. Duke rested his head on the seal's leg. Shadow stood guard, but his tail flicked occasionally, a silent acknowledgement of comfort. The man understood then that healing was mutual. He had saved them from abandonment, chaos, and fear, but they were saving him from lingering ghosts of combat, from sleepless nights, from the silence of post-service life. Veterans began to visit slowly, drawn by rumors of the unusual household, a man living with retired military canines in an isolated area. One former infantry soldier, wary of animals after years in the field, hesitated at the gate. Rex approached first, sniffing carefully. The soldier extended a hand. Rex nudged it with his nose, tail wagging faintly. Duke followed. Shadow observed, then allowed the man to sit nearby. Moments like this repeated over weeks, each one healing both dog and human in quiet, profound ways. The seal reflected often on the contrast between his time in service and life here. On missions, control was critical, obedience demanded, mistakes fatal. Here, control was an illusion. Patience, trust, and consistency mattered more than authority. And yet the lessons were similar. Leadership, presence, and courage could shape outcomes as decisively as any strategy in combat. By the end of the week, another subtle transformation occurred. The dogs began to communicate with each other, displaying behaviors rarely seen outside of service. Rex acted as a secondary guard, moving alongside Shadow. Duke followed quietly, offering reassurance to the younger or anxious dogs. They were forming a pack, not for missions, but for life, guided by a man who understood that true loyalty didn't require fear. The seal watched them from the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The yard was quiet now, the dogs resting, alert but at ease. He understood something profoundly simple yet extraordinary. These were not just dogs. They were warriors who had survived impossible circumstances, and they were teaching him to survive a different kind of battle, the battle of post-service life, of healing, of finding purpose beyond duty. Night came, peaceful for the first time since arrival. The storm, the panic, the chaos, all had been lessons. The pack lay near him, calm, exhausted, yet unbroken. He felt their warmth, their trust, their loyalty. And he knew this. What had begun as rescue had become something larger. The dogs had found safety. He had found trust. And together they were beginning to heal, one small step at a time. In the stillness, the seal whispered to the group, "We'll get through this, all of us, together." For the first time in weeks, each dog accepted the words, not just as sounds but as a promise. And in that quiet, fleeting moment, hope took root. Weeks turned into months, and the transformation became undeniable. The property, once a chaotic patch of mud and nervous energy, now pulsed with a quiet life, steady and deliberate. The seal had created more than a sanctuary. He had built a bridge between two worlds, The world of retired K-9 warriors and the world of humans who had carried invisible scars of their own. The first time a veteran came to visit, the SEAL noticed the hesitation in the man's movements before he even stepped onto the property. He was tall, broad-shouldered, but his hands trembled slightly. His eyes darted toward shadows. He flinched at sudden sounds. Every muscle was tense, the kind of tension that didn't vanish with sunlight. Rex, the Belgian, was the first to notice. The dog approached slowly, tail low but not tucked, ears alert. Duke followed behind him, moving cautiously, sniffing the air. Shadow, always observant, stayed near the SEAL, waiting, ready. The veteran froze. "Is it safe?" he asked, voice barely audible. The SEAL nodded. "They're not like other dogs, but they know a warrior when they see one." Slowly, hesitantly, the veteran extended his hand. Rex sniffed it once, then nudged it gently with his nose. The man inhaled sharply, caught off guard by the warmth, the connection, the calm confidence of a dog who had survived combat and come through it. Duke settled nearby, wagging his tail just slightly. Shadow watched, alert, but his posture softened and the man knew he was accepted. Tears welled up in the veteran's eyes before he could stop them. He whispered, I don't even know why I'm crying." The SEAL crouched beside him. "Because you're safe and because they know." It was true. These dogs had survived horrors most people could not imagine. They had been trained to protect, to hunt, to serve. But trauma left invisible scars just like it did in humans. And somehow, the veteran knew the dogs could see it, recognize it, and offer comfort that no words ever could. Over the next weeks, more veterans came. Some walked stiffly, shoulders hunched, eyes wary. Others sat silently, watching from a distance. The dogs, trained in the art of loyalty and vigilance, responded differently to each visitor. Rex acted as a guide, approaching those who needed reassurance. Duke offered a soft presence for the more anxious. Shadow moved closer to the most withdrawn, giving silent confidence, standing guard, allowing the humans to feel safety without force. One veteran, a former infantryman named, had never spoken of his experiences. He flinched at loud noises and avoided eye contact. But when Shadow placed his massive head on knee, the man froze, then slowly exhaled. He felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. The dog didn't demand anything. There were no commands, no expectations, just trust. Wept quietly, letting a lifetime of suppressed fear wash away in that moment. The SEAL observed quietly, standing slightly apart. He had seen this countless times in soldiers he had trained or served with, but there was something about this, something deeper. These dogs were not only healing him, they were healing others. Their loyalty, their presence, their patience was transforming lives, one veteran at a time. He realized that healing was not linear. Some days the veterans made progress, laughed softly, or petted the dogs with ease. Other days old fears returned, triggers from combat or personal loss resurfacing. But the dogs, like the SEAL, never gave up. They stayed consistent, patient, understanding, and slowly trust grew stronger. One particularly emotional afternoon, a young veteran approached Rex. The man's hands trembled as he extended them, expecting rejection. Rex nudged gently, then sat beside him, tail wagging faintly. The man collapsed to his knees, burying his face in the dog's fur. Duke rested his head on the man's shoulder, Shadow at his side, ever watchful. The SEAL stood nearby, heart heavy, recognizing that something miraculous was happening. These dogs, considered unadoptable, were rewriting their purpose. Nighttime became a ritual of connection. The SEAL would sit on the floor of the living room with the veterans and the dogs, blankets draped over knees, hands running through fur, eyes meeting, silent communication passing between species. No words could capture the depth of understanding, but everyone involved felt it. Pain had been acknowledged, trauma had been witnessed, and slowly trust, healing, and hope were replacing fear. At times, the SEAL reflected on his own journey. These dogs were showing him lessons he hadn't realized he still needed: patience, consistency, empathy, and the power of presence. He had spent years leading teams, giving orders, controlling outcomes. Here, he learned to follow instead. He learned to listen, to watch, to wait. He realized that trust, true trust, was a gift, not an expectation. The bond between man and dogs deepened with each passing day. The seal noticed subtle changes in their behavior. Rex, once hyperalert, would rest near the porch for longer periods, scanning less urgently. Duke, who had refused food and affection, now approached willingly, seeking connection. Shadow, ever vigilant, allowed moments of play and rest he had never allowed before. The veteran's presence accelerated these transformations. As humans touched, spoke to, or simply sat near the dogs responded with calm, measured reactions. They sensed pain, fear, and trauma, and chose to heal rather than fight. One evening, the seal watched as Rex nudged toward a small obstacle course he had built. Duke followed, encouraging gently, while Shadow stayed back, eyes tracking every movement, tail flicking in approval. Navigated the course slowly, awkwardly, but safely. By the end, a smile appeared on his face, fragile but real. For the first time in years, he felt capable. He felt alive. The seal felt it too, hope that stretched beyond his own recovery, a reminder that purpose is found not just in what you do, but in what you help others do. These dogs had once served in life-and-death situations. Now, they were saving lives in a different way, and the seal was witnessing it firsthand. Months passed. Veterans began visiting more frequently. Some came daily, some weekly, but all found a measure of peace they had long thought impossible. The property became a sanctuary not only for the dogs but for anyone carrying invisible scars. The seal realized that he had unintentionally created a new mission. Retired K9s helping veterans heal, veterans helping K9s regain trust, and all of them learning that companionship could be stronger than fear. Even the community began to take notice. Officials who had once doubted the seal's judgment returned, curious about the results. They found calm dogs, happy and obedient in ways that were never forced. They saw veterans smiling, laughing softly, connecting with creatures who had no voice but infinite loyalty. But the seal did not seek recognition. He knew the real victories were silent and private. He knew that every touch, every wag, every quiet moment of trust was worth more than any medal or headline. One night after the last veteran had left and the dogs had settled around him in their usual formation, the seal closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Rex lay near his side. Duke rested his head on his lap, and Shadow stood watch, body relaxed but alert. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel safe, not in the absence of danger but in the presence of trust, loyalty, and healing. He realized something profound. Healing went both ways. The dogs were no longer just survivors. They were teachers, mentors, and companions. They had taught him patience, compassion, and the power of being present. And in turn, he had given them something they had not known they needed. A second chance not to serve missions, but to serve life, to serve trust, to serve love. The stormy nights, the chaos, the fear, they had all been lessons. And now, surrounded by the quiet breathing of his pack, the seal understood that this was bigger than any mission he had ever undertaken. This was a war against loneliness, trauma, and fear, and together, man and dogs were winning. And as he drifted to sleep that night, surrounded by the warmth of creatures who had once faced death for strangers and now faced life with him, he knew one truth above all. None of them would ever be abandoned again. Spring arrived slowly, bringing soft sunlight that warmed the fields and trees surrounding the seal's property. The mud that had once dominated the yard dried, leaving patches of green grass where the dogs could move freely. The pack, once anxious and unpredictable, now moved with purpose and calm. Their eyes, once sharp with tension, reflected serenity and confidence. The seal stood on the porch, surveying the yard. Rex patrolled the perimeter, ears alert, but the constant hypervigilance had softened into watchful awareness. Duke lounged in the sun, muscles relaxed, occasionally stretching with ease that had been impossible months ago. Shadow walked silently near the house, moving with the precision of a soldier, but his body now radiated trust rather than suspicion. The transformation didn't stop with the dogs. Local veterans began to arrive regularly, some bringing friends who had struggled in silence for years. Word of the sanctuary spread quietly, through whispered recommendations and tentative phone calls. People came expecting dogs. They left having experienced something far deeper, a chance to heal, to feel understood, to be seen without judgment. One day, a young veteran named Aaron arrived. His movements were stiff, eyes haunted by memories of combat. He had been reluctant, skeptical, and anxious about facing animals at all. But when Rex approached slowly, tail low and ears alert, Aaron froze. For a long moment he did not move. Then Rex nudged his hand gently, pressing his nose lightly against Aaron's palm. The young veteran's shoulders relaxed. He exhaled deeply. I think he likes me," Aaron whispered, his voice trembling. The seal watched silently. He knew the bond forming before his eyes was fragile, delicate, but real. Rex had recognized a fellow warrior, sensing pain, fear, and courage all at once. Duke ambled forward, nudging Aaron gently with his head, while Shadow remained vigilant, standing nearby, ensuring safety. For the first time in years, Aaron smiled. Not a quick, forced smile, but a genuine one. The sanctuary evolved. It was no longer just a home for retired K9s. It became a lifeline for those haunted by invisible battles, a place where dogs and humans could learn from each other, heal together, and forge bonds that words could never capture. Each day brought new visitors, men and women by war, trauma, or loss, each seeking comfort, guidance, or simply the presence of creatures who had known loyalty, sacrifice, and courage. Training sessions shifted focus, not drills or commands, but exercises in trust and connection. The SEAL guided veterans through obstacle courses, agility training, and trust-building exercises with the dogs. The dogs responded intuitively, offering guidance, support, and silent encouragement. Rex became a leader in these sessions, demonstrating patience and confidence. Duke provided a gentle presence for anxious participants. Shadow's unwavering vigilance offered safety and reassurance. Even the most skeptical visitors began to change. A former combat nurse had never been around large dogs before. She flinched at barking and recoiled at sudden movements, but as she spent time with the pack, something shifted. Rex rested his head gently against her knee. Duke leaned lightly against her leg. Shadow watched closely, not intimidating but protective. Tears streamed down his face, unbidden. I feel safe," she whispered. The SEAL knew that safety was a rare gift for veterans like an Aaron. It wasn't given. It was earned silently through presence, patience, and trust. And these dogs, once deemed unadoptable, were masters at giving it. The sanctuary's reputation grew beyond the local community. Word spread through social media, articles, and veterans networks. People came from neighboring towns and states, seeking the solace only these retired K9s could provide. The SEAL often found himself overwhelmed, but he welcomed it. Every visitor was an opportunity, not just for the humans to heal, but for the dogs to continue their mission. One evening, after a long day of visitors, the SEAL sat on the porch, watching the pack move through the yard. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Rex patrolled calmly. Duke lay sprawled in the grass, and Shadow stood sentinel, eyes scanning but posture relaxed. The SEAL exhaled, allowing a rare smile to form. It had not been easy. There were nights of chaos, storms, and panic. There were moments when the SEAL questioned whether he could handle the responsibility. But now, seeing the transformation, the trust, the healing, the connection, he understood. This was more than a mission. This was a legacy. Veterans visited later that evening, sharing stories of progress, breakthroughs, and gratitude. Aaron had managed to sleep through the night for the first time in months, had laughed genuinely during the agility exercises. Others spoke of feeling seen, understood, and valued. The SEAL listened, silently proud, aware that the true heroes were not just the humans or the dogs, but both together, forming bonds that transcended species. He realized that the sanctuary had become a beacon of hope. The retired K9s, once overlooked, abandoned, or considered dangerous, had become teachers, mentors, and healers. They were no longer simply surviving, they were thriving, and in doing so, they were helping others thrive too. The seal often thought back to the day he had taken all of the dogs. At the time, it had seemed reckless, even impossible. But now he saw that it had been the only possible choice. Each dog, every scar, every anxious movement had led to this moment. A sanctuary where trust, loyalty, and healing could flourish. And yet he knew the work was never truly done. There would always be new veterans, new challenges, new fears to overcome. But for the first time, he felt confident that they could face them together. As night fell, the seal stood alone in the yard for a moment, watching the stars emerge. Rex lay at his feet, Duke curled nearby, and Shadow patrolled silently, a protective presence in the quiet darkness. The seal felt a profound sense of peace, one he had not known since leaving active service. These dogs had taught him more about courage, loyalty, and resilience than any mission, medal, or battlefield ever could. And in return, he had given them something equally vital, a second chance at life, at trust, at family. He knew that the sanctuary would continue to grow, that lives, both human and canine, would continue to be transformed. And he knew, deep in his heart, that none of them would ever be left behind again. For the first time, he felt certain of something he had long forgotten, that together they could survive anything, endure anything, and heal anything. The seal smiled, watching the stars reflected in Shadow's attentive eyes, and whispered softly, "We're home now, all of us." Years had passed since the Navy SEAL first drove the truck full of retired K-9s onto the property. What had started as a personal mission to give forgotten dogs a second chance had grown into something far greater. The sanctuary had become a symbol of hope, a place where humans and animals alike could heal, connect, and find trust again. The seal rose early one crisp spring morning, the sky painted in soft shades of pink and gold. The air smelled of fresh grass and dew, and the field stretched out before him, quiet but alive. Rex stood near the fence, surveying the property with the same vigilance he had carried since his first days on the seal's land. But there was calm in his movements now, confidence, assurance. Duke lay in the sun, older but content, the stiffness in his joints eased by months of care and love. Shadow, ever watchful, patrolled the perimeter, tail flicking with satisfaction, a sentinel who had finally found peace. Today was different. Veterans were arriving from across the state, some walking hesitantly, others with smiles, each carrying a story of transformation. They came not only for the dogs but for what the sanctuary represented: resilience, trust, and the chance to rebuild a fractured spirit. Aaron, the young veteran who had first arrived months ago with fear etched into his movements, stepped onto the field, standing tall, breathing easy, confidence evident in his posture. Rex immediately recognized him, trotting over with a joyful energy that had been absent during his early days at the sanctuary. Duke ambled forward, nuzzling Aaron's shoulder gently, while Shadow stood back, scanning the surroundings but allowing the young man to approach freely. The seal watched quietly, heart swelling. He had seen these transformations countless times, but each one still carried the weight of awe. The veterans were healing, but the dogs were healing as well. Each interaction, each touch, each wag of a tail was a reaffirmation of the bond that had started that first night, filled with fear and chaos. The sanctuary had also become a place of training, not for combat but for connection, empathy, and trust. Veterans learned to read the dog's signals, to respect their boundaries, and to recognize subtle signs of comfort and stress. The K-9s, in turn, responded intuitively, offering reassurance, guidance, and unconditional support. The lessons were mutual, the growth shared. The seal moved among them, watching interactions unfold. Once reserved and fearful of large dogs, knelt on the grass as Rex laid his head gently in her lap. She laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine, a melody that had been absent from her life for years. Duke rested against her side, while Shadow circled protectively, allowing her to feel safety without imposing dominance. It was during moments like this that the seal understood the true power of what he had built. This sanctuary was not just about retired K-9s or veterans. It was about connection, trust, and the quiet, steadfast work of healing invisible wounds. The dogs had become teachers. The humans had become students. And together, they were rewriting what it meant to survive trauma. By mid-morning, the group gathered near the porch. The seal addressed them, voice calm and steady. "You've all come a long way," he said. "These dogs have taught us something fundamental. Loyalty, trust, and courage aren't just for the battlefield. They're for life. And if we honor that, we can face anything together." The veterans nodded, eyes shining with gratitude. Many had tears brimming, unspoken emotions surfacing in the presence of creatures who had endured more than most humans could imagine. Some patted Rex or Duke, others spoke softly to Shadow, and each interaction reinforced the profound connection that had grown between species, a bond forged in adversity and nurtured in patience. Later, the seal walked the perimeter with the pack. Rex moved alongside him, ears alert but tail wagging softly. Duke followed slowly, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his fur. Shadow led the way, precise and steady, but relaxed enough to show trust in the seal's guidance. The wind carried the scent of flowers and pine, the air calm after weeks of rain. The seal paused, letting his eyes sweep over the property. Every corner, every tree, every path held memories. The chaos of early days, the storms, the nights filled with fear. And now, every inch of the land reflected healing, trust, and life. At the edge of the property, the seal paused to watch a group of veterans and dogs completing a trust exercise. One man leaned cautiously over a low obstacle. Rex stayed nearby, ready to support. Duke ambled forward, nudging his hand for reassurance. Shadow circled silently, eyes bright, ever watchful. The man completed the obstacle and smiled broadly. The dogs responded with gentle nudges and playful movements. Laughter, once scarce, filled the air. It was in these moments that the seal felt the culmination of everything he had worked for. Each rescued dog had become more than a companion. They had become a lifeline. Each veteran who arrived broken in spirit found not only comfort but a model of courage, resilience, and patience embodied by creatures who had survived wars, trauma, and abandonment. Even the surrounding community had changed. Neighbors who had once questioned the seal's choices now visited, bringing supplies, helping maintain the grounds, and occasionally watching quietly as the veterans and dogs interacted. The sanctuary had become a symbol, a place where those who had fought in silence could find voice, and those who had survived without recognition could find purpose. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with gold and crimson, the seal gathered the pack for their evening routine. Rex, Duke, and Shadow settled around him, bodies close, warmth and trust evident in every movement. The veterans lingered nearby, some sitting quietly, others watching with admiration. Silence fell, comfortable and profound, punctuated only by soft breathing and the occasional rustle of fur. The seal knelt, running his hands through Rex's coat, then Duke, then Shadow. "We've come a long way," he murmured, voice low but steady. "And this, all of this, is because none of us gave up. You never gave up. I never gave up. And together we built something that will last far beyond any one of us." He looked out across the property, the sun sinking behind the horizon. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and earth, of sweat and warmth, of trust and survival. He knew that the legacy of the retired K9s would continue long after he was gone. Veterans would return. Dogs would continue to teach. The bond between humans and animals, forged in loyalty and patience, would endure. That night, as he lay among the dogs on the porch, the seal reflected on the journey. From the first moment he said, "I'll take all these retired K9s, through storms, panic, and fear, to this moment of calm and connection. Everything had led here." These dogs were no longer just survivors, they were legends. Not because of medals or recognition, but because they had given others life, hope, and healing. Shadow rested his head on the seal's chest. Rex leaned against his side. Duke nestled at his feet. The man closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of their presence, the steady rhythm of breathing, the quiet strength of trust earned and kept. For the first time in years, he felt complete, not because the world was safe, but because the bond he shared with these warriors, four-legged and human, was unbreakable. The sanctuary would continue. New dogs would arrive. New veterans would find solace. The cycle of healing, trust, and loyalty would endure. And the story of a Navy SEAL who refused to abandon those who had served, and those who served beside them, would live on, not just in memory, but in every life touched by the sanctuary. And so, under the stars of the United States sky, a man and his pack of retired K-9s rested together, a living testament to courage, loyalty, and the extraordinary power of second chances. No one would ever be left behind again.